B. Herman Bartels, born April 14th, 1923 in Cleve, fell on November 26th, 1942 in the East. Herman was a grenadier in the 1st Company of Grenadier Regiment 216 of the 86th Infantry Division. He was killed by a headshot at Nevier, near Rochev. Given the location and time of his death, it appears he was killed during Operation Mars, which was a series of offensives in the larger Battle of Rochev. Aloy Barton, born October 21st, 1907 in Nutterden, fell on June 1st, 1943 in the East. Aloy was a Gefreiter in the 7th Company of Grenadier Regiment 474 of the 254th Infantry Division. He was killed by a headshot at Kalalovo, near Leningrad. Walter Baumann, born April 20th, 1925 in Elberfeld, fell February 25th, 1944 in the East. Walter was a grenadier in the 1st Company of Panzer Grenadier Division Feldherrnhalle. He was killed by a headshot near Narva and is buried at the Jovi Military Cemetery. Panzer Grenadier Division Feldherrnhalle was created out of the remains of the 60th Infantry Division, which was destroyed at Stalingrad. It would later be destroyed again in July of 1944 during Operation Bagration. Heinz von Beber, born September 25th, 1928 in Hasselt, fell April 11th, 1945. You will be sad, but your sorrow will turn into joy. You are sorry now, but I will see you again, and your heart will rejoice, and no one will take your joy from you. I have said this to you so that you may have peace in me. Farewell speech of Jesus, John 16:20-22. Gerhard Beltermann, born July 26, 1902 in Cleve, fell January 1st, 1944 in the East. Gerhardt was an Obergefreiter in the 1st Company of Strassenbau, or Road Construction, Battalion 580. He was wounded by an artillery shot to the head and left arm near Vitrenka, and died in a field hospital. He is probably buried as an unknown soldier in the Statkovo military cemetery. His battalion was subordinated to the 2nd Panzer Army. Johann Burns, born April 8, 1913 in Cleve, and fell August 19, 1941 in the East. Johann was an Obergefreiter in the 10th Company of Infantry Regiment 253 of the 34th Infantry Division. He was killed by a gut shot in the Desna section of the front. A little over a month later, on October 9, 1941, Aloy Pregler, whose death card I have here, in Oberschütze in the 13th Company of Infantry Regiment 199 List, another unit of the division, was killed by a shrapnel wound to the back of the head near Polava, Ukraine. Werner Bever, born October 19, 1919 in Hau, and fell on September 17, 1942 in the East. Werner was a Gefreiter in the 2nd Company of Infantry Regiment 164 of the 57th Infantry Division. He was obliterated by a direct artillery hit near Voronezh and is buried at the Kursk Military Cemetery, Block 7, Row 12, Grave 686. Bernhard Bayer, born December 9, 1924 in Cleve, and fell August 20, 1943 in the East. Bernhardt was a grenadier in the 11th Company of Grenadier Regiment 245 of the 88th Infantry Division. He was killed by an artillery hit to the chest and right upper arm near Brodsky, Ukraine. Friedrich Bayer, born February 4, 1922 in Cleve, and fell November 26, 1942 in the East. Josef Bockstegger, born February 28, 1923 in Gauche, and fell January 1, 1943 in Belgium. Josef was a grenadier in the 5th Company of Grenadier Regiment 114 of the 39th Infantry Division. His cause of death is not listed, and he is buried in the Lamel Military Cemetery, Block 21, Grave 629. Fritz Boden, born December 17, 1907 in Matterborn, and fell January 17, 1945 in the East. Heinrich Boden, born January 11, 1910 in Hau, and fell August 5, 1943 by a Rel. Heinrich was an Obergefreiter in the 2nd Company, Grenadier Regiment 58, 6th Infantry Division. He was killed by a headshot at Kromsky Most, near Kursk. Hermann Bongartz, born April 24, 1924 in Cleve, and fell July 24, 1942 in the East. Hermann was an Arbeitsmann in the 3rd Company of RAD Unit 310. He was killed by a gut shot on July 23, 1942 at Kastornoye, near Kursk. Paul von den Boom, born January 13, 1920 in Hasselt, and fell July 11, 1941 in the East. Paul was a pioneer in the 3rd Company of Pioneer Battalion 658. He was killed by a headshot in Adamovka, near Potolishch, Ukraine. Johann Vandenborg, born August 26, 1905 in Matterborn and fell August 15, 1944. Heinrich Brauers, born March 2, 1899 in Cleve and fell October 7, 1944 in an air raid. Heinrich Brauers, born February 26, 1917 in Cleve and fell August 8, 1942 at Ilmency. Heinrich was an Obergefreiter in Company 6, Feldregiment der Luftwaffe 3, Luftwaffe Division Meindl. He was killed by a shrapnel wound to the lungs at Orakovno, near Lake Ilmen. Heinrich died 4 months after two other members of the division, Ludwig Troll and Georg Friedel. Ludwig was a member of Company 5 of Feldregiment der Luftwaffe 4 and was killed by a headshot near Staraye on April 8, 1942. Georg was a member of the same company as Heinrich and died 2 days before Ludwig at Orakovo Zuyevo from an artillery shot to the chest and left arm. Gerhard Bruckmann, born March 12, 1924 in Grithausen, and fell on January 26, 1944 in the East. Gerhard was a grenadier of the 8th Company of Grenadier Regiment 366, Infantry Division 227. He was killed by a gunshot wound to the chest at Yelitsavetino, near Leningrad. C. Ferdinand Clawson, born December 18, 1914 in Cleve, and fell on December 25, 1941. Ferdinand was an Obergefreiter in the 2nd Company of Infantry Regiment 58, Infantry Division 6. He was killed at Gorky, near Ryshev, Russia. Ferdinand died nearly 2 years before his co-worker Heinrich Boden, who served in the same company. Fritz Clawson, born November 7, 1921 in Cleve, and fell on February 21, 1942 in the East. Gerhard Clawson, born October 19, 1925 in Cleve, and fell on October 7, 1944. Let us not grieve over our loved ones. They just go ahead of us and await us at our destination. Walter Clawson, born April 12, 1927 in Cleve, and fell October 7, 1944 during an air raid. This was the same air raid that killed Heinrich Brauers, who we mentioned previously. Paul Koenen, born February 7, 1923 in Cleve, and fell August 3, 1944 in the East. Paul was an Unteroffizier in the 5th Squadron of Transportgeschwader 5. This unit was equipped with the Messerschmitt Me-323 Gigant and the Junkers Ju-52. He died southwest of Tondorf by Poznan, Poland, and is buried in the Poznan Milostovo Cemetery in Poland, Block 1, Row 18, grave 477-479. Wilhelm Krunen, born March 26, 1923 in Wies, and fell September 3, 1942. Wilhelm was a Schütze in the 7th Company of Grenadier Regiment 401, Infantry Division 170. Wilhelm died of an issue with his lungs at a field hospital at Solugobovka, Russia. He is buried as an unknown soldier in the military cemetery there, in Block 3. For none of us lives for himself, and none dies for himself. If we live for the Lord. If we die for the Lord. Therefore, whether we live or die, we are the Lord's.